cares about the neighborhood, has a heart as big as this room, but she really didn't have a clue as to what's going on. So we sat there and waited because she was, now remember the word is supervised injection site. Well, she was having a meeting in the front of the clinic with a group of people talking about the mural exhibition that was going to be coming up over the next few weeks in downtown Vancouver, all the while where half a dozen or a dozen people were in the back openly injecting heroin. And I'm going to give it right back to Stefan right there to talk about an amazing experience that none of us had ever seen before.
Yeah, it stuck with me then. It'll stick with me probably forever. Imagine you are in this. You think maybe our friends on the left will have you believe that this is a clinical environment. Maybe smells sterile. You check in. No ID is required. You check in and you sign in as Bambi or Thug One or Devil Doer or whatever. There's no ID. You do say what you're coming in with. Are you going to snort cocaine? Are you going to shoot heroin? And while we were there waiting, Steely Dan is playing over the loudspeakers. There are fluorescent lighting up and down this area, and then in the back, where we could see were 12 booths with stainless steel tops. They weren't like those old phone booths that we used to. You actually sat down to make a phone call, and did not have phones. Let's just say. First guy I saw inject heroin into his hand, I won't forget because I was just truly sad, caring for my fellow man. What is this guy doing to himself? Within the next 10 minutes or so, we saw something, and I'll never, ever probably get tired of telling the enormity and the impact that it had on all of us. A young man in his 20s with a female companion. He lays flat on his back in this non-clinical environment. She kind of straddles him a little bit, and she gets out a needle, and she tries to stick it in his neck. She missed. No worries. He was fine because she re-injected and hit his jugular vein. And again, my God, what is going on? And the music is playing, and that's just one of the sidebar stories. We watched others that were injecting. They sat motionless for 15, 20 minutes to a point where our colleague Peter Boyles and I'm saying, how do they know he's not dead? No one is checking. Then one person collapsed and had the table and all the drug paraphernalia collapse. So here's what I find interesting and what you see on your screen. This is the outside of the main entrance of 58 East Hastings. You can see the lady with a trash can in her hand and a cigarette in her mouth, and a guy bending over. He's getting something out of his backpack, right? He's just bent over. No, that's how he walks. Right to his front is the next picture on the upper right. Man we saw sat laid motionless for a half an hour. This is outside of where all of these problems are supposed to be cured. And that's what the left would have you believe. Senator Brittany Patterson among them. By the way, she hates us. If any of you know her, she hates us. Lower left, real quick. Again, this is 50 feet from this main entrance. This was described to us as one of two of the most crime-ridden, drug-abused alleys in the entire country of Canada. Where's the other one? Oh, she said it's just a couple of blocks away. And then, Mark, you can address the one guy, because you took these photos. And in the bottom right photo, the black portion on the left-hand side is my shoulder. And I was interviewing Sarah, and that is actually her cheek right there on the right. Again, this is outside of all they would have to do, right, to get clean needles, is to walk right in and sign in with any fake name. And yet they're doing it out in the open, which is one of the reasons why we felt this type of thing would certainly happen on Colfax or Federal or Sheridan or wherever it possibly could come to Colorado.
And just quickly, the guy that's laying there up against the fence never moved, and they literally had to move his legs out of the alley in order for a city vehicle to go down the alley to do whatever they were going to do. So I'm going to switch just really quick to the next slide. And what you see there is that same group of people, but the guy with his sleeve rolled up there is injecting himself in the wrist, And if you look at the upper left, the guy in the red sweatsuit, we're standing right there. There's a police car 80 feet from where we stood while all this is going on. So he injected himself, and then the girl that's standing next to him, right outside the safe injection site, took the needle out of his arm, filled it again, and put it in hers. Right while we stood there and watched. The guy that's in the lower left never moved from that position the entire time we stood out there. And that's an old first-generation Mac laptop that he either was buying or selling at one of the old flea markets on the street on East Hastings. But then the bottom picture, the lower right, where those are circled, those are fresh needles along with the wrappers down there on the floor or on the street. So you can imagine where those just came from. 12 feet to the other side of the alley is where those existed. I'm going to skip the next slide because it was something that Stefan already talked about. That was just a movie of a jailed inmate getting out of prison, and his dealer was injecting him. Now we're into the public safety aspect of this. This is what the streets looked like the entire time we were there. As I said at the very beginning, there was never a time when there wasn't a fire engine, a police car, or a paramedic ambulance taking care of something going on. And believe me, there was plenty of it. And unfortunately, I think the upper right where you see that fire rig, there was so much activity that there weren't enough ambulances to go around in order to take care of all of these problems. And this was on a Thursday night in the middle of the winter in the northern latitudes of North America.
One other thing on this, on the public safety aspect, this would have been a pilot program funded privately. There would be no taxpayer expense. Who pays for these first responders, the police and fire and paramedics and all of that? So I crashed a community meeting with Councilman Albus Brooks. He was not happy to see me there. And he actually, for the first time, at least that I had understood, for the first time admitted, well, of course the city will pay for that. Well, when a city pays for something, the taxpayer pays for it.
So I think really what we came away with from there was really an understanding of what the consequences would be like if we brought it here to Denver. And we just weren't willing to allow that to come. So many of the ancillary issues that go along with that. You know, every time a fire rig or an ambulance or a police car turns on those red and blue lights and runs down the street, there's a great deal of danger to a lot of people, including injuring themselves in a traffic accident, running over a pedestrian. And by the way, we, more than one occasion, just about ran over someone in a daze just walking out in the middle of the street.
And they had reduced the whatever the Canadian miles per hour would be. It was basically 15 miles an hour along East Hastings because so many people, as Mark had mentioned, like zombies, just would wander out. A couple of times I thought I saw people trying to get hit. Why? You get hit, you maybe get a settlement. We saw probably 6 to 12, 6 during the day, maybe 6 at night, so maybe about a dozen total open drug deals right in front. As Mark mentioned, I mean, within yards of first responders, police officers. It was the ultimate don't ask, don't tell.
And in that upper left one where you see the police car in front of that looks like a little park. That reminded me very much of the intersection of 23rd, Park Avenue West, and Lawrence Street, down by the Samaritan Shelter and Denver Rescue Mission, very much like that. But that was drug deal central. We saw Mexican cartel soldiers standing on that intersection throughout the evening, walking up and down. And it was very interesting because we were driving a white, blacked-out window Dodge Durango that we rented from the car rental place. So
he looked like a cop.
We looked like the feds driving up there. But the telegraph that took place when we turned off of Carroll Avenue, made a right turn onto Hastings Street, it was just like a telegraph that the man is coming. They knew, they were expecting us and watched us through things, catcalled, whatever they could do to let people know that we were not welcome on Hastings Street. It was a tragic situation. And then the last thing I'll give you about the experience, and then we'll look at just a quick statistic because we are running out of time. We had the opportunity on your show to talk with a guy who works for the Waterworks department in Vancouver. We called him Bob, not his real name. He said that they would open up the meter wells where the water meters were down underneath the street, and they would often open those manhole covers and sometimes find 200 or 300 syringes. So imagine, once again, the danger being faced by city employees, city workers, just trying to do their job.
They have a
from
cocktail,
day to day.
Mark, as Mark knows. Bob told us they have a cocktail. If someone is actually pricked or stabbed, a city employee, they know which hospital to go to because they give them, I call it a cocktail or an antidote. They know exactly what to do if someone on the city payroll is actually potentially infected with or pricked with a dirty needle. It was truly amazing just to hear him. And he said, look, I've been an employee for 20 years with this city. This has not helped. This has made it worse.
So the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And you have to understand that we recognized right from the get-go that this is not the same scenario of opioid addiction where a business person who gets into a car accident and is injured and becomes addicted to OxyContin or some of the other opioid drugs that you see. Those people need help. But I guarantee you that they're not going to be the ones that are going to be going downtown and injecting heroin at a safe injection site. They need treatment. We need to find alternatives. There has to be a way to help them get better. But this is not the answer. If you look at this chart, if you go to 2003, which is about the middle of the chart, there were 190 opioid overdose deaths in the city of Vancouver in 2003. And if you move to just the end of 2018, and I think these statistics ran through November, is, if what I'm remembering is correct, 1,380. 725% growth in overdose deaths in Vancouver alone. So it really makes total sense why this cannot happen in Colorado. So we just wanted to kind of give you a brief overview and let you really experience what we brought to the state capitol this year. And thank you so much to the people who listened to our show, wrote the emails, wrote the letters, called their senators and their representatives, and made this happen. Now, it hasn't happened, and the one word I always say is, yet. We cannot let the pressure off. This must not be allowed to continue, not only in Colorado, but anywhere in the United States.
I did tell my audience, though, in returning this week, I said, the NFL now lets them do end zone dances, so at least for 2019 and this legislative session, let's spike the football because we won in 2019. But as Mark mentioned, we must continue this fight. So thank you very much.
All right, we've got a few minutes for questions. Gentleman in the back.
Kudos to you guys and Peter Boyle for what you did. Can you speak to Salem media's role in allowing you to push the position that you all did?
Yeah, so Salem Media's role in allowing us to go. How behind the scenes and honest do I get?
I think you should just say it. It's
so
interesting.
the night before we left on a Thursday. So Wednesday night, I got off the air at 7 p.m., and our big boss is almost always there. So I usually go in and visit. And he looked at me, and he said, I hope we're making the right decision in sending you guys to Vancouver. And I said, boss, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. I saw him for the first time 2 days ago as I was out of the country, and I said, how was that small capital investment? He said, I think it was worth it. So we basically, and it was really Peter Boyles who said, let's do this, we should do this. And, you know, this was probably at most $3,000 for us to go up there, and trust me, we ate at McDonald's literally.
We did.
So,
Right, sir.
So in the graph you had showing the years toward our right, maybe the last 3 or 4 years was the obvious spike. So was that obvious spike related to when this program
The program started in 2003. So that's why I picked out that year in the middle of the chart to kind of give you a...
It's fentanyl. Fentanyl. It's coming in. We saw what we would describe, and Mark certainly knows more, Mexican cartel, kind of the lookout standing on the corners. But I had a very good conversation with one of the reporters with the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national newspaper. She actually literally lives on East Hastings. And we're talking about this. She says that fentanyl is all coming in from China. And it's synthetic, and it's killing people, and you saw the spike. That's why.
Yes, ma'am.
So, first of all, I want to thank you and Peter and Mark for taking the initiative to go up there and for sharing it, because we certainly never heard anything from our mainstream media. But what is the most impressive is what having the news brought to the people, but the people responding and putting pressure, and how important and effective it is to call your congressman and put pressure on those people, because it made all the difference.
Well, thank you so much. You bet. Here's what happened. I'm going to be completely honest again. The Democrats started to question themselves. That's exactly what happened in the last month and a half at the state capitol. There were a few that were responding to people. I mean, it's great because people would send us emails and go, look at what I just got. Look at this response. And a couple of them were like, well, Representative Moreno or whomever, they're now starting to question it because they were wondering whether or not it was good. When they can fight amongst themselves, that's a good thing. I liked that, and we got the end result.
Not to the legislature per se. We did do it at the Capitol. Senator Vicky Marble invited us down about a month ago, probably now, and we did do it for a group of, everyone was invited.
How many Democrats do you think showed up?
Yeah. There were a
Zero.
couple of Democrat interns that were there, we're pretty sure. So we were preaching to the choir.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you concerned about the mushroom thing coming on the ballot in November?
It's a great segue.
Well, I absolutely am, and it's equally as scary. Mushrooms are very dangerous. The hallucinogenic qualities of mushrooms are going to cause consequences that I'm sure that we're not even aware of yet.
If I could just make one more point, and Jeff, again, thank you so much for having us here, and thank you for everybody's attention. The one thing I kept stressing on my program over and over and over after getting Governor Polis in a 5-minute interview on CIS, specifically, 3 times in 5 minutes, he said the word skeptical. And I thought maybe we had a chance at this Hail Mary actually being completed. But going back to almost what the lady had said earlier, I kept saying over and over, what we saw, we're not lying. We saw what we saw. And I've been a newsman a long time. If I went up there and saw it work, I would have said, sadly, we got this wrong. It is working. We didn't see that. But my question and my comment to lawmakers from Denver City Council, which, by the way, 13 people voted. It was a 12-1 vote to approve this. 1 guy went. 1 guy. But I kept saying, are you elected officials willing to roll the dice that this will not happen in Denver? How could you take that gamble? And back to your point, that's why we are so appreciative of everyone who took it upon themselves. They heard us, but they actually then took action.
Right. Can I say something real quick on the psilocybin? So what she's referencing is the fact that this May, the city of Denver is going to vote on the decriminalization of psychedelic mushrooms. And this was the first step that they moved in when it comes to marijuana as well. They started with decriminalization, and then they make the argument, let's take it out of the shadows. Let's get it out of the black market. We can professionalize it. And really what ends up happening is they commercialize it. And you then have companies that have a big financial incentive to get as many people using it as they possibly can. And we've had story after story about how the black market in Colorado hasn't gone anywhere when it comes to marijuana. In fact, it's gotten worse. It's hiding in plain sight. So the bottom line when it comes to the commercialization of these drugs, it's about money. They bring out stories. They bring out kind of these anecdotes. It's about money, and they want to try to get people of Denver hooked on drugs again. And at some point, I've done a lot of interviews on this, no one's going to go downtown Denver. I mean, if you've got people on proposed needle injection sites, massive amounts of marijuana, now decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms, you don't want to be a part of that. Congressman.
And then couple that, just 1 second, and then couple that with the ability to live exactly wherever you want. It could be on your front doorstep. When you put all that together. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bob.
No, go ahead, Congressman.
Did you get a chance to talk to any of the, I guess, public officials, deeply responsible in Vancouver, to ask the question, how are they going to put the genie back in the bottle? And what are they going to do about this now that it's there?
I know my producer, Bob, made a couple of inquiries. It's funny how when you're the opposition, they don't want to talk to you. And I think to your point, I mean, we all know that the genie's out of the bottle. The genie's out of the bottle with marijuana here in Colorado, could be with mushrooms, but there's no, I mean, you could stop it, obviously, but I don't think that's going to happen. This is the new norm in a portion of Vancouver. By the way, this is, if you've ever taken an Alaskan cruise, this is maybe 6 blocks from where those cruise ships are. Think about this. If that were to have happened here in Colorado at 231 East Colfax, Mark mentioned it's right literally across the property from the state capitol. It's also right across kind of kitty corner from where every school bus pulls up so children can take a tour of the Capitol. Oh, and it's also 2 blocks away from the Department of Education.
Maybe I can do a follow-up. We're talking about selling dirty pants. The world's oldest profession.
It exists, Bob.
Well,
There.
that's exactly what I assumed, that it's just rampant as well. Any way to make a buck.
Right.
To get a fix.
And since we've been there, 2 more sites have opened. There are now 7.
I think it depends on how you use it. Fentanyl works if you don't OD, sadly. And it's very, very, from what I understand, very, very cheap to produce.
All right, we've got
Thank
to
you,
wrap
guys.
up. Let's give these guys a round of applause. Thank you for your work. Conservatives can win in this state. Conservatives can win. Great job. We're going to reset the stage for our final debate, which is going to be on the national popular vote, which, if you've been following, Colorado is set to hand over its electoral votes to however the people in Chicago and San Francisco vote. So the leaders of the national popular vote movement are here, and we're going to begin here in just about 5 minutes. So stand by, and we're going to begin here in just a second. We have Sean? All right. That's a good question. I'll be your timer.
All right, Joe. I'm taking a few of those. I'm taking a few of those back with me to the Senate. I've got 5 here.
All right. Go ahead and grab a seat. We're going to get started here. All right, friends. Thank you so much. Have we had a fun day here? Yeah? It's been a wonderful day. Great to be a part of CPAC's partnership. Absolutely. Let me... before we get going. All right, so you want to do this on me? Friends, during the debate, make sure you let the speakers know how you feel with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We got this idea when Corey Gardner visited our wonderful campus here on his kind of whirlwind tour of Colorado, and our liberal friends had these, and we thought that was a good idea. So we'll provide one of these for you all, and make sure you let the speakers know how you feel. So friends, this is our final event of the day. This is the big debate we've been waiting for, which is very exciting. The national popular vote in the state of Colorado has passed the House, has passed the Senate, and is currently sitting on Governor Polis's desk waiting to be signed. He said he's going to sign it. But there we go. There's a good practice. Are you in favor of the national popular vote? Hey, there you go. At least we got one. You guys are going to
give me a complex.
Well, this is a timely debate because this isn't going to go away. Colorado is part of a number of states that have decided to enact this, and there's an effort to get rid of the Electoral College all out. And so we need to talk about that, and we're so grateful for the variety of friends that have come by to be a part of this today. We'll start at the end of the line there with Mr. Ted Trimpa. Ted Trimpa is the principal and CEO of Trimpa Group, a national political consulting and government relations firm that specializes in progressive public policy advocacy and political strategy. Called, quote, Colorado's Answer to Karl Rove by The Atlantic, Mr. Trimpa is a nationally recognized Democratic strategist and operative. He is considered a key architect of the political infrastructure that facilitated the Democrat Party's resurgence in Colorado after decades of Republican dominance. Ted, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm just waiting for all the red. So first off, I just want to say thank you to Jeff. Thank you to folks like Bob, nice to know, for actually having this debate. And we are always thrilled to come and kind of explain why we're doing what we're doing. I will say, prior to explaining this, that the two people you have sitting here probably couldn't be on more opposite ends of a political spectrum. The only thing we agree on is this. Everything else we don't. You'll hear from here in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is basically divide this presentation into 5 parts. There's going to be a brief overview as to what national popular vote is, where we've been playing, why we need it, what it is, and then a conclusion. So the national popular vote...
Hold on real quick, Mr. Haynes. We're going to go and introduce everybody, and then I'm going to turn it over to... Oh, sorry, Mr. Trimpa. And I'm going to turn it over to our moderator who'll help moderate it. Okay? Just real quick. Great. Mr. Haynes served 14 years in the California legislature, is a former California Senate Republican whip, assistant Republican leader, California State of the California State Assembly, California Senate Constitutional Amendments Committee Chair, year 2000 National Chair of the American Legislative Exchange Council, President of the Institute for Research on Presidential Elections, and Senior Consultant to the National Popular Vote. Ray, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Former Senator Kevin Lumberg served in the Colorado legislature from 2003 to 2018, and today is the executive director for the Republican Study Committee of Colorado. He is also the recipient of the 2018 John Andrews Award, which the Centennial Institute bestows upon a leader in Colorado for conservative leadership. Senator Lumberg, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Senator Bob Gardner is a state senator from District 12, representing the eastern Colorado Springs region, a United States Air Force veteran and attorney. Senator Gardner was elected to the Colorado House of Representatives as a Republican in 2006 and represents the Colorado Springs region. Thanks so much for being here, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's good to see so many friends. Thank you.
Great. And moderating our debate today is one of my favorite political reporters in the state. I get in debates a lot with political reporters, especially if you follow my Twitter feed. But there's one that I feel is exceptionally balanced, very fair. I've always been a big fan of her. We're very proud to have Sean Boyd with us today. Sean Boyd is the political reporter at CBS 4 News. She covers the state legislature, our congressional delegation, and leads our coverage of elections, which includes giving political ads, quote, a reality check. I even think you were in a few political ads against your will this last year. She has interviewed President Obama, President Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Mitt Romney, as well as state and congressional leaders, and I'm going to turn it over to her. Friends, let's welcome all of our guests here and our moderator, Sean Boyd.
Thanks, Jeff. It's nice to be back on CCU's campus. The last time I was here, I moderated a different debate, you'll recall, on the legalization of marijuana. So I think this one might be more controversial than that even. It is interesting, though, when that question was on the ballot, it was phrased as, should we regulate marijuana like alcohol? Seemed a very straightforward question, but I think most Coloradans today would agree it obscured the complexities and the consequences involved. And that's regardless of whether you think it's been good or bad for Colorado. Similarly, the question of should we decide the presidency based on who wins the most votes nationally seems straightforward, but it is far more complex, which is why we'll be unpacking that over the next hour. Before we dive in, let me briefly set the stage. Colorado, as most of you know, and as Jeff mentioned, is about to become the 13th state, right, with D.C. to join an interstate compact. Each state in the compact has agreed to give all of its electors to whichever candidate wins the most votes nationally. Right now, you may know, we give all of our electors in Colorado to the candidate who wins the most votes in this state. So whichever candidate gets to 270 first wins the election. Right now, the Interstate Compact has 172 electoral votes in it with the combined states. So once that reaches the magic 270, that compact would kick in. So I want to start by giving each of you 5 minutes to lay out what you think are the most important considerations in this debate. And we're going to start with proponents. Ted?
Thank you. So as I was saying earlier, I'm going to divide this into 5 sections. One is an overview. The second is where we've been playing, how many states, get some explanation about that, why we believe that this is needed, and then how, what's the authority for it, and then, of course, a conclusion. So the National Popular Vote Bill would guarantee that the presidency would go to whoever wins the most votes in all 50 states. Therefore, every vote in every state in every presidential election would count. Since 2006, and I've been involved in this from the beginning, we have now enacted it in 12 states representing 172 electoral votes. Obviously, we need 98 more in order for the compact to trigger. There are 4 small states that have done this, 4 medium states that have done this, and 4 large states that have done this. So it's a mix across the country. And we already have 1 chamber wins in 11 additional states. And it's worth noting, 2 of those chambers were in Arizona, red, Oklahoma, red. Now, why do we need it? When you think about the shortcomings of the current system, it's not the Electoral College. What we're proposing has nothing to do with getting rid of the Electoral College. That is a core part of the 10th Amendment. That is a core part of state control. That is a core part of states still controlling how the president is elected. The problem is the winner-take-all rule. The winner-take-all rule essentially makes 12 states matter, 13, 10, how many ever battleground states you have, and the only thing that determines a battleground state is whether or not the presidential election in that state is competitive. There's no mythology, there isn't something that magically picks the states. It is just a matter of, is it competitive? And the number of states and who is a battleground state over the years changes, it's fleeting. I remember when Colorado wasn't a battleground state and we begged to get money and we got 0. These last couple of elections, we got a lot. So would you think about the winner-take-all rule and the number of elections that have been close? 5 elections out of our 45 presidential elections, you take out elections, presidential elections that are more than 10% wins, so basically landslide wins, it's 1 in 7 that go the wrong way. And the more divided this country gets, the more that you have fewer and fewer states where the races are going to be competitive, it is very likely we're going to have even more what we call wrong way elections. And because of the winner-take-all rule, candidates have no incentive to campaign outside of those 12 states. You know, you take a look at 12 of the smallest states or least populous states, 6 are Republican, 6 are Democratic. Those states get nothing. There isn't a presidential visit, there isn't a presidential dime, there are no presidential resources spent in that state. Same thing happens with big red and blue states. Think about Texas, think about California, think about New York. Now, what is the underlying authority for this? The Constitution is really clear. Article 2, Section 1 says, each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. States have what's called exclusive and plenary authority to determine how their electors are chosen. And that has been confirmed and affirmed by 2 Supreme Court decisions, one in 1892 and Bush v. Gore. So a state can pick any method that it wants. For example, Massachusetts has had 12 different methods. I think North Carolina has 7 different methods. The control of how those electors are awarded is strictly within each of those state legislatures. So when you take a look at what national popular vote is, it actually is the conservative approach to electing the president. It preserves the Electoral College, meaning you're not going to federalize elections, you're not going to have the federal government involved in elections, everything is still state-based, and it ensures that every vote is equal in every state and in every presidential election.
All right, Bob, you want to go next?
I think that's me.
Kevin. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I'll read my opening comments here, and for the sake of brevity, I'll call the National Popular Vote Compact the NPV. Senator Gardner and I both opposed this bill. He considered the bill this year, and I had the opportunity to hear this very same issue in 2007 in the House State Affairs Committee. That year, it was called Senate Bill 46, which was passed by the Senate. However, on the House side, with 7 Democrats and 4 Republicans, we defeated the measure with a vote of 1 to 10. In 2007, this bill was killed with a strong bipartisan vote, and I wish I could say the same for this year. The NPV will radically overturn the system we have for electing president, and it has the potential of doing much more damage to our civil government. It severely upsets the balance of power between the states and the federal government. It will deny all states not in the compact any meaningful role in selecting the president. The compact violates several parts of the Constitution, and if implemented, it may lead to a significant constitutional crisis. I submit that the NPV could become a grave threat to the union of our republic. In the current system, the states elect the president. I'm going to repeat that. The states elect the president. With the NPV, individual state authority and influence will be severely diminished, Consequently, the NPV will concentrate more power into the federal government. The NPV also violates several parts of the Constitution. I would cite Article 1, Section 10, Article 2, Section 1, Article 5, and the 12th Amendment. The proponents argue that in Article 1, each state is given the authority to determine how their electors are selected. And all the NPV does is direct that state to ignore the will of their own citizens and follow the national vote totals. But they are using this clause to completely destroy the reason the Electoral College system was created. And that is to empower the states to elect the president, empower the states to elect the president. The NPV is designated to become effective if a bare minimum of 270 electoral votes are controlled by the states participating in the contract. Now, this would force at least 20 to 30 additional states who never adopted this compact to live under this new rule. And the NPV does not require the approval of Congress, even though this is a constitutional mandate for all state compacts that affect the balance of powers between the states and the federal government. Now, I want to conclude my opening remarks with bad news and good news. First, the bad. If the NPV is implemented, here is how it will play out. It will be challenged by some states not a part of the compact. I find it hard to believe the court will uphold the compact, but in either case, the decision will cast a long, dark shadow of distrust on all succeeding presidential elections. We will have two separate, mutually exclusive mechanisms for electing the president, each endorsed by a large number of individual states. This will further divide the Union into two distinct camps. In these times of razor-sharp political conflict, we cannot afford to fan these flames of disagreement and distrust. Now, the good news. There is a better way. If the proponents of the NPV are so convinced that the president should be selected by the people directly and not the states, don't try to work around the Constitution. Amend it as it is established in Article 5. Go through Congress or go through the states directly. Article 5 provides both possibilities. Our founders wisely knew that such dramatic changes needed to be a high bar, requiring a supermajority of agreement. So let me just review slightly. One is, it's the states who elect the president. That's how the Electoral College was established. That was a very careful balance that was required. And number two, compacts of this nature require approval or consent, as it says, by Congress. Neither of these are satisfied by the current NPV. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Ray?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I have no, look, I don't entertain any illusions that I'm going to change your mind in 5 minutes or less, but what I would like to do is challenge you to actually go out and do your own research. Because what I'm going to quote to you and what I'm going to tell to you is exactly the opposite of what he has just said, and it's going to come straight from the mouths of their founders and the courts themselves. First of all, you heard Ted talk about the Constitution. It says, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. Now, I'm a Scalia-style originalist, and by golly, if the founders said it in the Constitution, that's the word, they meant what they said. But I'm not just going to rely on that. I'll give you the Federalist number 45, which is written by James Madison. He says, the state governments may be regarded as constituent and essential parts of the federal government, whilst the latter, that is the federal government, is in no wise essential to the operation or organization of the former. Without the interventions of the state legislatures, the President of the United States cannot be elected at all. Here's the deal. It's not the states that determine who becomes the president. It's actually the state legislatures. Now, if you don't believe that, I'll read you the case from 1892. This is what the Supreme Court said in 1892. The Constitution does not provide that the appointment of electors shall be by popular vote, which is what we're proposing, nor that the electors shall be voted upon by a general ticket. The general ticket is the winner-take-all law. nor that a majority of those who exercise the elective franchise can alone choose the electors. In other words, you don't have the right to vote for president. The founders never gave you that right. The right that you have was given to you by the state legislatures. So the legislatures have the right to do as they wish. Here's the problem. You know, I've got quotes from Donald Trump where he says he'd rather have the system be a popular vote system. He said that on at least 5 occasions. But here, the problem is because only 10 or 12 states elect the President of the United States, 80% of the country is ignored in the process of electing the President of the United States. You want to know why we have Medicare Part D, the free drugs for seniors? Because George W. Bush, a fiscally conservative president, was worried about winning Florida in 2004, so he gave seniors free drugs. Why did we get a No Child Left Behind? It's because George W. Bush, a local control president, was worried about winning Ohio in 2004. Battleground state politics create bad policy, particularly for conservatives. Now, here's the other problem on a political level. Let's just walk away from the policy level. Let's talk about the political level. Google the words blue wall. If you want to know what the real problem the Republicans are facing on a national level, Google the words blue wall. That's it's 18 states representing 242 electoral votes that have voted for the Democrats since 1992. Now, Florida has 29 electoral votes. You know what 29 plus or 242 is? That's 271. If you've been following the demographic changes going on in Florida, Donald Trump won Florida by 117,000 votes in 2016. Governor and now Senator Scott won Florida by 4,000 votes in 2018. Why is that? Because over 1 million Puerto Ricans have moved into Florida since 2012. If Florida ever goes Democrat, we have, as Republicans, we're not going to see a Republican president in our lifetime because the Democrats will start out with 271 electoral votes. And for those of you who think that Donald Trump took away the blue wall in 2016, Pat Buchanan wrote that the Democrat, lest we forget Hillary Clinton, not the most charismatic candidate that Democrats have put up in decades, beat Trump by nearly 3 million votes. And while Trump pierced the famous blue wall, the 18 states that voted Democratic in every presidential election between 1992 and 2012, the Democratic trend that created that wall is still working. One last thing to think of when you get through this. Because of the way we allocate our electoral votes, because we apportion Congress on the basis of population, not on the basis of citizenship, and each seat in Congress is 1 electoral vote, what that means is the Democrat states have picked up, and they get 10 electoral votes on the basis of illegal immigration alone. Just so you understand that, we're in Colorado. Illegal immigrants have more to say about who becomes president of the United States than the citizens of Colorado. National Popular Vote Interstate Compact fixes that overnight.
All right, Bob.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here once again. You know, much of the popular debate on NPV compact focuses on how the compact might affect presidential campaigns, outcomes of elections for Republicans or Democrats, and so forth. And while the compact is going to change those dynamics, I think it will be most likely in ways that we really cannot foresee. So in this few minutes, I want to talk to you about how to think about this issue. The core issues in this discussion are, or ought to be, what is the constitutionality of achieving the national popular vote by state compact, and what is the wisdom or the merits of doing so? Now, first, the question of constitutionality. Proponents assert that since Article 1 of the Constitution permits states to appoint electors in such manner as they may assign them, or the legislature may direct, states could assign them by the national popular vote and do so in a compact with the other states. That's the core of NPV. You know, this argument takes the words of the Constitution as being without constraint, and I too am a Scalia strict constructionist and literalist, but there are some constraints, and they tend to the proponents tend to scoff, at least at opponents' concerns, but a few moments of thought will show you that there are implicit constraints on the state's choices that are derived from the language of the Constitution and the things that the framers did in constructing our government. The framers did consider several ways of electing a president, the main proposals being our current electoral college system, direct election by the people, popular vote, and the election by Congress even, or state legislatures in a single vote per state. In fact, 9 states in the Constitutional Convention voted against the idea of national popular vote. Only one state, Pennsylvania, chose the idea of national popular vote. Instead, the framers chose a system of electors allocated to the states based upon the total representation of the states in Congress, both by population in the House and by state in the Senate. The framers were not, of course, infallible, and their decisions were not binding for all time. So the Constitution certainly allows us to make those changes, but to do so by constitutional amendment. And that has been done on a couple of occasions with respect to the election of U.S. senators, the election of the vice president. So my point is that implicit in the Constitution, implicit in what the framers did, was a federal system, and a federal system of electors that the states would decide to appoint or award. But the idea that you might do so in a manner contrary to what your own voters chose strains credulity. That could not be what the framers intended. And in fact, something that's not been discussed a lot in this debate is the notion out of Article 4, if memory serves me right, that the federal government is to guarantee us a Republican form of government. And there's a lot of debate about what that means. But one of the things that it generally is understood to mean is that a state legislature couldn't elect a dictator. A state legislature couldn't give up the notions of representative government. So if a state legislature can't do that, can a state legislature decide that a bunch of other states could outvote your own citizens? Would that be a Republican form of government? I think that's not been discussed at all, but that's one of the issues and one that we ought to think about and talk about. More in a moment about the merits, about the consent requirement for compacts, because it does change the relative power between the states, and that does require congressional consent. Thank you.
So I want to now start with the questions, drill down a little deeper on some of the issues that you raised here. So it'll be 1 minute answer, 1 minute rebuttal, and any of you can take it from either side, the questions. I want to start with the question on constitutionality, since both sides raised that. And this is for the opponents, so Bob or Kevin. The Constitution says, as you've said, state legislatures appoint electors as they choose. So how is it unconstitutional for them to appoint the electors based on the national popular vote instead of the state popular vote, since the Constitution gives them that choice, that power? Either of you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that is a great and key question in this debate. And the answer is, as I just said a moment ago, there are implicit constraints in that. Could you really upset the complete structure of our federal government set forth in the Constitution? Again, the Constitution says that we're guaranteed a Republican form of government, little r. And that says you cannot give up the power of your people to others, to the other states, to a dictatorship, whatever it might be. So I don't buy this notion that there's no constraint whatsoever in those words, and I believe that the United States Supreme Court would ultimately agree with that.
Ray?
Well, let me quote the United States Supreme Court, if I may. In McPherson versus Blacker, in 1892, when original intent really meant original intent, the Supreme Court actually said the Constitution recognizes that the people act through their representatives in the legislature and leaves it to the legislature exclusively to define the method of effecting the object, that is, how to elect the president. The framers of the Constitution used words in their natural sense, and where they are plain and clear, resort to collateral aids is unnecessary and cannot be indulged in to narrow or enlarge the test. What Senator Gardner wants to do is narrow the text by indulging in those kinds of aids. The Supreme Court's already said whatever the legislatures choose is constitutional. And as recently as 3 days ago, a federal court has said that and has followed McPherson versus Blacker.
Okay, another constitutionality question, this time for the proponents. Interstate compacts, both of you have talked about these interstate compacts. They're different when you're talking about things like water issues as opposed to election issues. Compacts that impact the power distribution between the federal government and states or between states, the Constitution says, need Congress approval. So why would this not need congressional approval?
Well, first of all, Article 1, Section 10, I am a Scalia-style originalist, and Article 1, Section 10 says every state compact ought to do that. The Supreme Court in the Multi-State Tax Commission United States Steel versus the Multi-State Tax Commission ruled that if it doesn't affect federal power, then it doesn't need congressional approval. And since state legislatures have the exclusive power to determine the method of appointing the electors, this is not a shared power between the feds and the state. It only exists in the state legislature. There is an argument to be made under the U.S. Steel versus Multi-State Tax Commission that this does not require federal approval. That being said, the law has been since at least the mid-1800s that you don't get federal approval till the compact is triggered.
Right. Bob.
Thank you. So I find it curious that the proponents want to read the words about the legislature choosing the method very strictly and the congressional consent to fall back on Supreme Court precedent. But what that precedent really says is that that when a compact between the states affects the power between and among the states, and they've said this as recently as 1985 at the United States Supreme Court, then it must be approved by the Congress. And that is exactly what this does. Political scientists have done this evaluation, and it is clear that states with less population lose political power, lose influence in the election in extraordinary amounts. And the idea that you could impose that kind of a loss of power on them by a compact among states, even some that might lose their own power, is anathema to the constitutional structure that we have.
Okay, there are a lot of logistical questions in terms of how this would work, so I want to move to those now. And this question is for proponents. Because of different voting laws in different states, one state could allow people to vote that another state doesn't, to maximize their impact on the national popular vote. How do you avoid that?
Well, if that were a problem today, it would be more of a problem today given how winner-take-all works in terms of the battleground states that we have. When you start having more states involved, then the chance of anybody trying to game the system would be a lot less. And if that's true, that this kind of thing would happen, then we would be seeing it in gubernatorial elections in states across the country, which we're not.
Okay. Kevin?
Actually, let me make a little footnote on this winner-take-all concept, because the states could change that right now, and it seems to me if that's the problem, then go after that with a solution, which is individual states, even as Nebraska and Maine, don't have a winner-take-all mechanism, can still employ that. But the national popular vote actually makes it a mega winner-take-all with no state impact. With respect to will this have, what about this disparity? Yeah, that the election laws are very different in the different states, and the only solution I see is the federal government will have to take over the elections and actually determine that. A huge takeover by the federal system over the state's autonomy today.
This question for opponents. If the national popular vote favors larger states, as you've said, doesn't our electoral college system favor the smaller states. Is that any more fair? We've talked a lot about fairness here.
Actually, the Electoral College exists because there was this disparity initially between the large states, the small states, the northern states, the southern states, and this is a balance that was struck. So that, and also it's a recognition of the sovereign authority that each individual state possesses. If you were to go to a national popular vote, you completely strip away that balance that was created in favor of just one. And you know, this idea that only the big states take advantage. Now, with a national popular vote, only the big urban areas will now dominate. And you can pretty much map that out. It's the East Coast, it's the West Coast, a little bit in the center, maybe a couple of other points, and then everything else is ignored.
Go
Real
ahead,
quickly,
Greg.
just to kind of, look, the Electoral College was not created to protect the small states. If it was, the small states would have the same number of votes as the big states, but they don't. Big states have more votes. That means big states win in that kind of a vote. The Electoral College was not enacted to protect or to protect the rural areas against the urban areas. Just a matter of demographics. 17% of the people in this country live in the 100 largest cities, and 17% of those people live in the rural areas of this country. They're the exact same size. Now, suburban and exurban are the other 2/3. But the urban areas vote 62% Democrat, the suburban or the rural areas vote 62% Republican, and the suburban areas break it back and forth. But the bottom line on the thing is the Electoral College was intended, I've read every note in the Madison's notes on the Constitution. Not one of them have said any of the things that you've just heard about what the founders intended to say. Every single method of electing the President of the United States was turned down in the Constitutional Convention. They handed it off to the states as a compromise.
So what happens if we need a recount in one of these national popular vote scenarios? It would seem to be chaos. If you look at what happened in Florida.
Yeah, right. Well, let's start with the current system. The reason we had the problem in Florida before is because one state that was separated by 527 votes was going to be determinative of the outcome of the election. The closest presidential election in the last 100 years was Kennedy-Nixon, and 117,000 votes determined the outcome of that, okay? And no recount was done. Actually, Al Gore's race, there was 534,000 votes between the two of them. So he would not have gotten a recount because it would not have changed the outcome. The bottom line on the issue is, could recounts be an issue? Well, if an election is close enough to make recounts an issue under national popular vote, it would be a horrible mess under current winner-take-all laws because you wouldn't have one state doing a recount. You'd have like 30 states doing a recount because that's how close the election would be.
Okay. You guys have anything in response to that?
Well, thank you, Sean. The senator's right. It would be. If you think 2000 was a controversy, imagine this. We have 50 different state election laws, and while there are probably some subset of 5 or 6 different things, some states do not allow convicted felons to vote. Some states allow convicted felons to vote. The state of Colorado allows a convicted felon who has served his or her sentence completely to vote. And need I go on about who will be a valid elector in a national popular vote system? The reason we have, among other reasons, but one reason we have state secretaries of state as our chief election officials is because our sovereign states are the building blocks and determinant of who in their state has the right to vote.
So you all have touched on a lot of pros and cons here, and I want to follow up on some of those. And this question for the opponents. National popular vote at its core is about making sure that every vote counts the same, no matter where you live. So right now, the person who votes Democratic in Mississippi, or let's say Republican in New York, doesn't have much incentive to vote, right, under this current system. So isn't this a fairer way to do it?
Well, first let's let's go back to the Constitution and figure out what electing a president is all about. It is the states electing the president. Initially, it was the state legislatures electing the electors directly, and then that was put into a more general popular vote among the states, but it's still the states electing the president. And that's why going to the national popular vote is not only corrupting the system and invalidating the majority of the state's system, because it only takes 270 votes, electoral votes, to make this happen, so most of the states are discounted here, but you know, you're putting apples to oranges here by saying, well, won't this be more fair? Well, if it is, then change the Constitution so that it's no longer the states electing the president. It's just upside down and so far backwards that it needs to be squared through Article 5.
Ted?
We're going to go back to the Constitution, go back to the 2 Supreme Court cases. It is not the states electing, it's the state legislatures choosing the electors, and then whatever rule it is in order to choose those electors. If what we're really concerned about is making sure that we're protecting 10th Amendment rights and we're protecting the rights of states to be involved in these elections and their votes to be involved in these elections, then why would we have a winner-take-all system that leaves out 85% of the country? If we're really concerned about making sure that each state gets to participate in this election and be part of what, even using Senator Lundberg's standard, then why do we have a system that ignores over 3/4 of the states?
So this question for proponents, and Kevin, you just touched on this. The issues important to one state may not be important to another. So awarding electors state by state would better reflect the views of voters in those states rather than the nation's view. Doesn't this minimize the independent role of states? To you.
Real simply stated, if you're not a battleground state, you don't matter. So they're already minimized. 80% of this country is already minimized because if you're a battleground state, if you, for instance, if you have mining issues in Colorado, but the voters of Pennsylvania think your mines ought to be shut down, your mines get shut down because Pennsylvania is a battleground state and the president will make sure that that happens. When every single vote in every single state matters in every single election, then all of a sudden, the President of the United States has to worry about what the people of Colorado want because their votes matter. And that's in the end, the choice of the state legislature in determining the method of electing the President of the United States is what does the state legislature do to maximize the state's interest in electing the President of the United States. If you're a non-battleground state, this makes all the sense in the world because right now your voters don't matter. This makes them matter.
You guys, rebuttal?
Well, you know, this notion that someone in a state that's not a swing state, their vote simply doesn't matter, is a spurious one. It vaults off of this notion that I went to the polls in November, and believe me, I went to the polls and I lost. But my vote counted. It was counted, and it mattered in my district. So the notion that the people of, say, Mississippi or Texas that are not battleground states don't have the same kind of a vote, their electors are determined by the voters of that state. The fact that they lost doesn't mean their vote didn't count. It just means that the constituency of which they're a member, their state, favored one candidate overwhelmingly over the other. It goes to the core of whether the president is the president of the American people or whether he's the president of the United States.
A quick follow-up on this for the proponents. Why should a state's electors be given to a candidate that didn't win that state? I imagine like a Republican candidate, a President Trump, winning the presidency, and a California handing over all of its electors to that candidate.
Well, first off, we're electing the President of the United States. We're not electing the President of Colorado. Second, under the current system of winner-take-all, all you need is 50+1. So all the votes after 50+1 are irrelevant, and then all the losing votes are irrelevant. If you go to a national popular vote system, All of the losing votes go to a candidate. All the winning votes go to a candidate. So therefore, then all of those voters within that state get recognized.
Yeah, I would simply add this. Nobody has a party on Electoral College voting day. Everybody has the party on Election Day. Nobody knows how the Electoral College actually votes, or very few people. The people on the stage know. So, you know, the bottom line on the thing is people know who wins on Election Day. They don't, and the state is trading the state identity. Coloradans voted for whoever Coloradans voted for in exchange for input into who actually becomes president of the United States. And that's a decision the state legislature makes.
Another follow-up, why would we not focus on the big state issues under this? You know, as Bob has discussed, most of the population lives in the urban corridors. Why would those not become the issues of the campaign? Well,
there's a whole bunch of, I mean, you can go through all the census data, but 17% of the people live in the largest 100 cities. 83 beats 17 every single time in any election I've ever been in. If the guy who got 83% of the vote wins. So you wouldn't focus on 17% of the population. That's number one. Number two, the other argument they always say, well, 50% of the people live on the, within 50 miles of the coast. That means 50% of the people don't. So you don't win by focusing on one large area. I use my old Senate seat as an example. 13% of my district lived in the San Diego County part of my district, but I got 85% of the vote down there. It overcame the 40% of my district in the Riverside part of my district, and that's the votes down there overcame the large urban area because they turned out big time for me. That's how you run elections. Where are your voters and how are you going to turn them out? Not where they live, or not how, not whether they live in a city or a rural area, but are they going to turning them out and making sure every single one of your supporters vote?
Let's be a little more practical about how politics and how elections actually function, though. If somebody comes running for U.S. Senate or for president in Colorado, they don't go to Joe's Colorado where 150 people live. No, they go to Denver, they go to Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, Boulder. They go to where the people are. It's a simple political axiom that you do go to where the largest group is so that you can influence the most number of people. Yes, of course, it will be focused around the big urban areas only because that's all that will count. It will be enough to overwhelm. You can't go to 50,000 little towns. You go to 5 or 10 big places and you really make the impact. It's the same dilemma, be a big state or a big urban area. That's just the reality of politics.
I have to respond to this. Okay. This just ignores arithmetic. 5%, seriously, the 5 biggest cities are 6% of the population. Population of the 50 biggest cities is 15%. And we're not going to get 100% of that vote. And in terms of where you campaign, take a look at how presidents campaign in Ohio. They go to literally every corner of Ohio. They spend resources in every corner of Ohio because they know they can't win just by going to Columbus and Cleveland.
Go ahead. You're the only one who hasn't commented on this one.
So you've lost control. You know, all of us in this debate today have either run for office or have been key campaign staff in elections. We know both objectively and intuitively that the electoral constituency, the people who vote and how they are made up and the way in which those votes are cast, drives the candidate and ultimately elected officials and their intention and interest. The direct vote of the president will radically change the presidential constituency from states to the population at large. That is a serious error in my view, but it is a legitimate debate. It is one that we ought to have around a constitutional amendment in this country.
Why not seek a change to the Constitution? Why go it this way? Or at the very minimum, if you're for, you know, this direct democracy, make sure you go to the voters in the states.
Well, first of all, it's not a direct democracy. Direct democracy is issue by issue. Republic is where I vote for somebody to represent me. All I'm doing is changing the
popular
district.
Vote. Let's talk about popular vote.
I'm changing the district the president runs in from the battleground states, which is what they run in right now. you know, in any election, if a vote matters, you campaign for those votes, and the president doesn't campaign in 80% of the states. So we know the votes don't matter because they don't campaign there. But let's start, why not go through a constitutional amendment as the answer? Look, I think the Electoral College is an important institution, serves a very important function. It's not the function you hear about in civics class. What the Electoral College does is protect the states from Congress. And what a constitutional amendment would do by taking the power away from the states would allow Congress to write election law. And I guarantee you, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, Democrats don't want Republicans writing election law when they're in charge, and Republicans don't want Democrats writing election law when the Democrats are in charge. That's what the Electoral College does right now. It makes sure Congress can't write a single election law. It leaves it in the exclusive province in the state. That's why you don't go through the constitutional amendment. That's just really, really bad policy from a conservative constitutional point of view.
Let me give you a little lesson on Article 5, because there are two ways to amend the Constitution. It's either going through Congress to initiate those amendments or going through the states through a convention of states. Really, there are two elements here that continually bother me on this. One is that the proponents refuse to acknowledge that the proper mechanism to make this major change in national policy is through amending the Constitution, and Article 5 is very much available if it's a big enough job. Number two, you got the little cards for that. Yeah. Number two is the point of winner take all. This has nothing to do with winner take all. That's a state-by-state issue. Address it if you're really that concerned about it.
All right. It's time to wrap things up. You each get a 2-minute close here, and we're going to start with opponents for the close. Bob or Kevin, who wants to take it first?
Okay. I'll go. Okay. I'm ready to go. Fair enough. So, unfortunately, excuse me, the push for NPV is a continuation, perhaps even a culmination, of states losing or even surrendering their sovereignty to the federal government, such that they are more and more nothing more than administrative units of a strong national government rather than the sovereign states that they were intended to be. As I said a moment ago, everyone here on this stage has been a candidate or worked on a campaign or both, and we know that when you change the constituency, and the constituency will be not states as states, but the entire population, the entire voting population of the United States, you'll pay attention to your constituency. The proponents are right about that. But what does that mean for our government? It means that the presidential election is going to be purely a national electorate with a large and diverse country which has an electoral college and has states to ameliorate, frankly, the divisions, to unify, to bring this country together. My very real fear is that a national popular vote will not be unifying, but it will be more divisive. It will cause it to be more difficult for the people of the Rocky Mountain West to coexist with the people on the East and West Coast, because they will feel more and more like the people of Weld County do at the Capitol, that their voice is not heard. We will feel more and more as if our voice is not heard, that our vote truly does not count. But those votes are counted today in the electoral vote, and we are counted as a state of Colorado. I do, with Senator Lundberg, think that we ought to look at different ways by congressional district awarding them, by doing so instead of winner take all. But that's a debate that we can do on another day. Thank you.
Okay, Ray?
Thank you. Look, back in February of 1999, I was one of the first 25 elected officials in the country to endorse George W. Bush for president. Given what happened in Florida in 2000, that's what got me looking at electoral college reform. Let me go through a couple of things. You don't want to do a constitutional amendment. This is constitutionally allowable because state legislatures have exclusive and plenary power over the granting of electors. Going through a constitutional amendment is foolhardy because it takes the power completely away from the states. A state can get out of the compact as easily as they get in. Here's the other point. You know, I don't know all the small cities of Colorado, but I do know in my district, Valley Center had 575 people in it. Riverside had 40,000 people, or Riverside was 40% of my millions-person district. I did not ignore the people of Valley Center. I asked them for their vote. In 40 of the 50 states, presidential candidates never ask anybody for their vote. And you want to know where the conservatives in this country live? Take a look at that red-blue map that you see. They all live in that big red splotch that's right in the middle that presidents never go to and ask for their vote. You want to know why conservatives are ignored by the Republican Party is because they know they campaign to the moderates in Cleveland and Miami, and they forget about the conservatives in Colorado and Wyoming and South and North Dakota and all throughout the South. That's the challenge we face. How do we make those folks matter? We join up. This is a way of pooling those votes together and making them all important to the Republican Party and making them all important to the country. And it maintains the structure that the founders set up by the states making the determination on what's in the state's best interest. And in most states right now, that best interest is having every single one of those votes matter.
Kevin?
This compact is illegal, and it's an end run around the principles and the processes of our government. I say that because it violates the Constitution by not requiring consent from Congress. It's very clear. You know, if we're going to be such strict constitutional, you know, if we're going to follow the Constitution strictly, we need to follow it, and that would require congressional approval for this state compact agreement to actually take effect. But they're going to ignore that. They are going to also ignore the fact that the Electoral College is a setup of the states electing the president. If you want to change that, amend the Constitution, but don't go through with this reckless and dangerous mechanism that is guaranteed to divide the nation between the states that agreed to it and the states that did not agree to it. That, I submit, is playing with a very volatile scenario that could divide us in ways that we cannot even imagine today.
Ted, get the last word here.
What is volatile, what is unfair, is that 85% of this country gets ignored. You think about the policies that get twisted. Remember the BP disaster in the Gulf? That oil hit Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. The day after it hit Florida, Obama was on a beach doing a press conference. Ray has talked about multiple areas where it was an anathema to conservatives as to what G.W. Bush actually agreed to do. The Supreme Court has been clear. The state legislatures determine how these electors are chosen. The winner-take-all rule, if you're in a state, you have to do winner-take-all rule or you're giving away half of your leverage. You know, and that may seem unfair, but that's what the 1892 Supreme Court case was about. States came in and said, hey, this is unfair to us because we're forced to take winner-take-all. And the court said, tough. Plain language of the Constitution is clear. So it's time for us to make sure every single vote in this country counts. It's time, I'm sitting here as a liberal, and the conservative voice, for the most part, gets ignored because of what Ray was talking about and where those voices live. It is better for us, just like within state politics in Colorado, to have a vibrant Republican Party, to have a vibrant conservative movement, and to have a vibrant Democratic Party, and have a vibrant, I don't like progressive, I call myself liberal. You have a liberal movement. It's time that we do that and provide that kind of fairness to every single voter, no matter which state that they live in.
Thank you. Can't help but wonder what the Founding Fathers would think if they were sitting here today about what's been said, right? Change is often difficult, but I think especially when you're talking about changing a system that's been in place 200 years, it's important to note this change is not imminent, but momentum is certainly growing, and I think our panelists today brought up some important considerations, so let's thank them.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much, and thank you, Sean Boyd. You did a wonderful job. Thank you for moderating this. Let's give her a round of applause as well. Friends, so we're going to have to wrap up here. If these gentlemen, can you stick around for a little bit to answer some questions? I think our audience would love to chat with you. I do want to, as we close here, I want to recognize a member of the CPAC Board of Trustees that joined us here. We've known him in Colorado. He's been a force for the conservative movement. Let's give a round of applause to Bob Beaupre for joining us. Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate it. Well, friends, I hope you had a wonderful day, and I hope you'll join us July 12th through the 13th for the Western Conservative Summit, where we do this with 2,000 of our friends and get to hear from a wide variety of different speakers. But have a wonderful weekend. God bless you, and thank you for coming out. Good night.